Okay, so poltergeists, right? It's one of those topics, I don't know about you, but it just kind of sends shivers down my spine, you know?
Yeah, I get it. It's like this universal thing, right? Every culture has its own stories about poltergeists.
Totally. Like whispers in the dark, objects moving,
Mm.
strange noises. Even some stories about biting.
Yeah, the biting, that's a new one. We've got this Wikipedia article here all about poltergeists.
Perfect. Let's dive in. But before we get too far into the spooky stuff, can you give us a sense of what the experts are saying? What's the general consensus about poltergeists?
Well, the article makes a good point right off the bat. There's a difference between people claiming something happened and actual proof, you know?
Right, like just because someone says they saw a ghost doesn't make it true. So how do we separate those spooky stories from something real?
Well, a lot of the cases that have been investigated pretty thoroughly, they end up having much more, shall we say, down-to-earth explanations.
Down to earth, like what? Give me an example.
Well, think about it. Those classic haunted house things. Lights flickering, things moving, weird sounds in the walls.
Yeah, classic horror movie stuff.
Right. Sometimes it's not ghosts, it's just people.
You're saying some of those spooky stories are just pranks?
More often than you might think. You've heard of that theory about the naughty little girl, right?
Yeah.
The article mentions this researcher, Frank Podmore. He looked into a bunch of poltergeist cases, and a lot of them ended up being, well, kids wanting attention.
Oh man, that makes sense. I can totally see that happening. But what about those cases where it's not just kids being kids? There's that investigator, Joe Nickel, right? What's his take?
Oh, yeah. Nickel, he's a fascinating guy. He's super skeptical about this stuff.
As he should be.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he says even those cases where it seems like there's no explanation, there usually is one.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Have you heard of the Bell Witch? It's a really famous one.
Oh yeah, from America, right?
Yep, back in the 1800s, people were saying objects were flying around, they were hearing voices.
Sounds like a classic haunting.
Right. But Nickel looked into it, and he's pretty convinced it was all a big hoax.
Whoa, seriously? What, like, one of the family members was messing with everyone?
Exactly. He thinks it was probably one of the sons who was really good at sleight of hand and throwing his voice.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, so pranks, hoaxes, it happens. But what about those really old cases, like hundreds of years ago?
Yeah.
The article mentions one from 1772, the Stockwell ghost. Surely that wasn't just some bored teenager.
Well, we can't go back in time and interview every possible prankster, but it's true. A lot of those really old cases, once you really dig into them, they kind of fall apart.
Really? Even the famous ones?
Yep. Like the Enfield poltergeist.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing about that one. Wasn't that in the 70s?
Yeah, that's the one. Objects moving, voices, the whole bit. They even made a documentary about it.
So what happened? Was it debunked too?
Well, let's just say that when some researchers dug a little deeper, they found evidence that some of the weird stuff that happened might have been staged.
You're kidding. They faked it. Okay, so pranks, both old and new. But what about those cases where it seems like there's something else going on? The article talks about this one case from the late 1800s, the Caledonia Mills case. It mentions this thing called dissociation. What's that all about?
Ah, yes. That case brings up a whole other angle, the psychology of it all.
Okay, this is getting interesting. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, there was this researcher, Walter Franklin Prince, and he was looking into all these claims at the Caledonia Mills.
What kind of claims?
Oh, you know, the usual poltergeist stuff, objects moving, weird noises, even fires starting out of nowhere.
Whoa, hold on. Fires, too. This is getting wild.
Right. So Prince, he's investigating, and he comes to this conclusion. It's not ghosts. It's this thing called dissociation.
Dissociation. Okay, now I'm really lost. What does that even mean?
Basically, it's like someone's thoughts, feelings, memories, even their sense of self. It all gets kind of jumbled up.
So you're saying their brains are playing tricks on them, making them think they're seeing things that aren't really there.
Exactly. And it's not as uncommon as you might think.
Wow, that's wild.
Right.
So it's not always ghosts or pranks. Sometimes it's our own minds.
Precisely. And there's even a case involving Carl Jung. You know, the Carl Jung.
Wait, Carl Jung, like the famous psychoanalyst, he got mixed up in this stuff too.
He did. He even thought he experienced something strange.
What, like he saw a ghost?
Well, he said he saw a table split in half right in front of him.
Whoa, seriously? A table just split in half? And what did he say caused it? A poltergeist.
He actually said it was because of his cousin, that she was in some kind of trance. Can you believe that?
That's incredible. Even Carl Jung was stumped. So, if it's not always mischievous spirits or bored teenagers, and maybe not even always our own minds at play,
Yeah.
what else could be causing these strange events?
Well, there are some researchers who believe that what we think of as, poltergeist activity could actually be caused by totally natural things. Stuff we just haven't figured out completely yet.
Okay, now that's interesting. Like what kind of stuff? The article mentions unusual air currents. What's that all about?
Yeah, like drafts. Those can slam doors shut, make things move around. It could startle someone who's, already a little on edge.
Right, right. Especially in an old house or something. I
Yeah.
could see that happening. What else? It also talks about underground water. How does that play into it?
So sometimes those shifts in the water table underground, it can create vibrations, even sounds. And someone might think, oh no, a ghost, when really it's just, the house settling or whatever.
It's amazing how our brains work, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
hard to connect the dots. But this is kind of reassuring, actually. I mean, some of these cases could just be perfectly explainable things. Though, I gotta ask, what about those really weird cases? Like when people see balls of light flying around? Isn't that like the classic poltergeist thing?
Oh, absolutely. It's like straight out of a ghost story. But, the article actually mentions ball lightning as a possible explanation for that.
Ball lightning. Now, that's something we haven't gotten to the bottom of yet. What is that exactly?
It's this weird phenomenon. It's like a ball of electricity, and it can happen during thunderstorms. People say it just kind of hovers or moves around in strange ways.
And some researchers think that this ball lightning, this strange electrical thing, could be what's behind objects moving or even flying across the room in some of these poltergeist stories.
Exactly. It's definitely a possibility. But we need to be careful here because we're talking about things we don't understand fully. It's easy to jump to conclusions, but science takes time, right?
Absolutely, I get it. You don't want to jump to conclusions without real evidence.
Mm.
But we're already this deep into the weeds, so I have to ask about psychokinesis. What about the possibility that people can move things with their minds?
Now there's a topic and a half. Psychokinesis. It's like the ultimate parlor trick.
Right. I mean, if you could move things with your mind, that would explain so much. So are there people who believe this could be connected to poltergeists?
There are. Some parapsychologists, they think it's totally possible. This guy, Nandor Fodor, he really believed that some people, maybe without even realizing it, could be behind these poltergeist things.
So, like, their emotions are so strong, they're basically bending reality around them, causing things to move, making noises, that whole deal.
Yeah, that's the general idea. It's a cool theory, but is there any hard evidence to back it up? That's a different story.
Right. I can imagine it's not so easy to study something like that in a lab. Can you imagine trying to get a poltergeist to perform on demand?
Right, like, okay, Mr. Poltergeist, could you move that lamp again? We need another take.
Exactly. But seriously, I get it. Trying to study something like psychokinesis scientifically, that's got to be incredibly tough. We're talking about subtle things, the power of the mind. Who knows what we're really dealing with there? But since we're already talking about the unexplained, we have to address the elephant in the room here. Have any researchers actually entertained the idea that maybe, just maybe, it really is spirits?
You're really set on getting to the bottom of this, aren't you?
Hey, it wouldn't be a real deep dive if we didn't, would it?
Well, we do like to keep an open mind, right? It wouldn't be right to talk about poltergeists and completely ignore that whole spirit angle.
Right. So, like, are there actual researchers out there who are putting their money on the spirit explanation? Who are they, and what's their logic?
Well, there's this group called the Spiritists. They've been studying this kind of thing for ages, and they think that poltergeists are, well, actual spirits, but not just any spirits. They say it's like these, how do we put this, kind of less evolved spirits.
Okay, so not the wispy ghosts haunting old houses. What, like something a little more basic?
Exactly. The article mentions Allan Kardec. He's considered like the founder of Spiritism.
Uh,
And he said these spirits, they're super connected to the elements like fire, air, water, earth, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Interesting. So are they saying that this connection to the elements could be how these spirits mess with the physical world, like causing objects to move or whatever?
That's the gist of it, yeah. They believe these spirits can manipulate these forces to interact with us, Maybe they're trying to get our attention. Who knows? It's a cool idea, and it kind of lines up with some of those old school poltergeist stories.
Okay, so did they give any specific examples, cases where they think those element-connected spirits were behind it?
Yeah, the article mentions a few. There's this one from 1946, the Mäkelä ghost case in Finland. It was a big deal at the time. All the classic poltergeist stuff, moving objects, weird noises. The spiritists were pretty sure it was an earthbound spirit trying to reach out somehow.
Wow, a spirit making headlines. That's something else. And what about that one, the Devil's a Martin case? What makes that one stand out?
Oh man, that one's even wilder. It actually went to court. Back in the late 1800s, this was in Finland too, people started experiencing all this weird stuff, things disappearing and reappearing, furniture going crazy. And some people were convinced it was demons or devils, hence the name. They were so convinced that it actually went to court. Can you believe that?
People were testifying in court about this stuff.
That's
You know,
intense.
it really makes you think about how real these experiences must have felt, whatever the explanation was.
Well, we've gone down quite the rabbit hole today. We started with pranks and hoaxes, then got into the psychological side of things, even touched on ball lightning and the power of the human mind. It's been a wild ride. So, where does this leave us? What's the takeaway for our listeners? Honestly, I think the biggest thing we can take away from all this is that the world is full of mysteries. Just because we can't explain something right away doesn't automatically make it supernatural, you know? Sometimes the answer is super simple, like someone playing a prank. And sometimes it's something way more complicated, like a glimpse into how our brains work, or even the universe itself.
That's a good point. Maybe it's not always about finding all the answers. Maybe it's about being open to different possibilities, you know?
Totally. Who knows what we'll discover in the future? But it's those questions that keep things interesting.
I love that. And that brings us to our final thought for today. If you had the power to move things with your mind, how would you let the world know you had it? Something to think about. Until next time, stay curious.